Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. Ferrer, your professor in research in social studies. Our topic this morning is on the collection of data. First, we're going to define data. Data are collection of numbers, quantities, facts, or records which are being used as basis for drawing conclusions or making inferences. This is according to Good to 1972. Data are what research is searching for and which are subjected to analysis, statistical procedures, and interpretation so that inferences, principles, or generalizations are drawn. Now let's proceed to the classification of data. We have the primary data and the secondary data. Now, for primary data, these are data gathered from primary sources. These sources includes individual persons, organized groups or organizations, established practices such as marriage, religious rites, or legal system. This also includes documents in its original form, such as the Constitution. Then we have living organisms such as animals or plants or people. No? Then you can also use a source of your data, man-made materials such as buildings and the likes. Or you wish to study on natural objects, so most probably the sources of your data are, let's say, rain, wind, typhoon, and many others. Now, for secondary data, these are those which are being gathered from secondary sources. And of course, this includes books. We have articles which are being published in the professional journals. You have unpublished masters or dissertations. You may also use monographs or manuscripts and or all other second-hand sources, such as those which are being gathered through the websites. Now let's have the categories of data. There are 5 categories of data. First are facts. Now what are facts? These are recollections, observations, or perceptions of people about themselves and or other people, such as regards to their age, to their sex, height, or color, or their date of birth, or civil status, number of children, their addresses, and many other facts regarding these people. Next, we have attitudes and feelings. This refers to your respondents' ideas and thoughts or their feelings about the topic that you are undertaking. Another category is about their judgment. These are your respondents' ideas or opinion about his behavior, how he describes or how he gives some judgment or opinion about his behavior or that of other respondents, if the case may be. Then another category is the psychomotor skills. This pertains to manipulative skills of an individual or about his activities that involves the use of his senses. And another is results of tests and experiments which are being published by books or journals or other forms of publications. Now let's proceed with the modes of gathering your data from your sources or from your respondents. And one of this mode is through the use of interview as your instrument. Now let's define what interview is. As the term implies, interview is a face-to-face relationship between two persons, and these two persons are the interviewer, or the one who asks questions to gather information, and the second is the interviewee, the one who supplies the information asked for. In using this interview in gathering your data as your instrument, there are of course advantages in the use of this instrument. One is interview yields more complete and valid information. This is because if you are not satisfied with the answer, you can always ask a follow-up question in order to complete the data that you are looking for, and a valid information because you can always validate the answers of your interviewee. And another advantage is that interview can be used in all kinds of people, whether they know how to write or they do not know. By using interview, you can gather data from them. Another advantage is you can always clarify points which are vague to you as the interviewer or as the researcher. There are times when your respondents will give you vague answers to your question. So by this kind of mode of gathering data, you can always clarify those points which are not clear to you during the interview. Then another advantage is that only your interviewee can reply to the questions you are asking. So by that, you can be sure that the answers given to you are being provided by the sources that you wish to include in your study. Then another advantage is while doing the interview, you being the interviewer can observe the non-verbal reactions or behavior of your respondents, since the activity is face-to-face. So you can even tell whether the interviewee is giving you a valid or correct response or not by observing his non-verbal reactions or behavior. And another is complex questions can be explained. That's what I am telling you earlier. In cases where they cannot easily understand the question, you can always simplify those complex questions so that your respondents or your interviewee can understand what you are trying to ask from them. And there is flexibility. You can, by using interview, you can be flexible as to the time, the availability, the place where your interviewee wishes to conduct the interview, or in the other way around, the interviewee can be flexible also. And you can even set the tone of the environment for which you are going to conduct the interview. So given those advantages, of course, there are also disadvantages in using this interview as mode of gathering data from your respondents. And one is there are times when your respondents are hard to contact, especially if your respondents are located in places where it's difficult for you to have access to them. So in those cases, then it will be hard for you to find them or to have contact to these respondents that you have. And another disadvantage, of course, it is expensive, since there is a need for you to meet your interviewee personally, and of course it entails expense as to the transportation, another as to food, and other requirements needed for you to conduct an interview, such as the presence of or the availability of instruments such as a recorder, a camera, for you to gather complete data. Another disadvantage is the responses may be inaccurate if they will be given no time to check for records, especially if an interview is being conducted in a place away from sources of relevant documents, and by that it will be impossible for you to check if your respondents are giving you accurate data per records. And of course, doing interview is time consuming, because you have to ask your sources one at a time, and that entails not only expense as to your time, but it includes your efforts, so as your financial sources. And another disadvantage is it might entail inconveniences for both of you, being the interviewer and your interviewee, particularly as to the place where the interview is to be conducted. And another is, if it is your first time to meet your interviewee, there's a need for you to feel comfortable, or at least you have to establish some rapport with your interviewee. Then another disadvantage is that there is no anonymity of your interviewee. So since you're using this as a mode of gathering your data, there is of course the possibility that you will know your interviewee, and their anonymity cannot be protected due to this mode of gathering data. And another disadvantage is the tendency for the interviewee to introduce bias. There might be chances that since no time for you to check on documents, so he might not give you exact answers, or he might give you some prejudices in giving the answers, or on your part, since you have made immediate contact with your interviewee, there might be that tendency for you to introduce also bias as far as the data are concerned. Now let's proceed with the types of interview. First is the standardized interview. This is where the interviewer is not allowed to change the specific wordings of the questions and the interview schedule. So when I say interview schedule, these are the list of questions that you have crafted beforehand for you serve as your guide in conducting the interview. So if you will be using the standardized type, then you are not allowed to change any wordings in that interview schedule, or sometimes it's called interview guide. Then another type is the non-standardized interview. This is where the interviewer has the complete freedom to develop its interview in the most appropriate manner for its situation. So this is the opposite of the first type. In here, you are given the freedom, no, to reword if needed the questions that you have listed in your interview schedule or in your interview guide. There may be the chances of restating your question or translating your questions in languages most appropriate to your interviewee or most appropriate to the situation where you are conducting the interview. And the third one is the semi-standardized. This is where interviewer required to ask a number of specific major questions, and beyond this, he is free to prove as he pleases. So in this type of interview, the interviewer can ask the major questions specified in the guide, and after that, he is already free to ask follow-up questions in order to prove, particularly on the answers given by the interviewee. Then another is the non-directive interview. So in the non-directive interview, the interviewee is now allowed and to express his feelings without fear of disapproval. So this is also a type of interview where your interviewee themselves are being given the chance to express their feelings without fear of receiving disapproval from the researcher or the interviewer. However, you have to be careful also of not letting the interviewee to deviate from the questions that you are trying to ask or from the data that you are trying to collect from them. Then the last is the focused interview, or also called in-depth interview. This is somewhat similar to non-standardized interview, in which no required questions may be asked by the interviewer, but he is just having a deeper conversation with the sources of the data or by the respondents, and in so doing, he has to make sure that necessary questions needed to be answered are being introduced during their interview. So those are the disadvantages of using interview as the mode of collecting your data. Now let's define the interview instrument, which includes the interview schedule and the interview guide. When we say interview schedule, this is similar to your questionnaire in the manner of the preparation and validation. The only difference is that the questions is read to the respondents for him to answer, and the reply is written by the interviewer. Okay? And your interview guide, this does not go into detail about the questions to be asked, but it only provides ideas, and this allows the interviewer to freely pursue relevant topic and in depth during the conduct of the interview. So you may choose among these two instruments in preparing for your data gathering. That is, if you're going to use interview as a mode, then you may choose among the interview schedule or the interview guide. As what I am saying earlier, an interview schedule is similar to a questionnaire. The only difference is that the questions here are being read by you, and the answers or the reply of your interviewee are being written also by you. While in the use of the interview guide, this do not give details about the questions, but rather it just provide you some idea, or as to serve as your guide, and conducting the interview with your respondents. Now let's proceed with a few steps in the interview. One is with the planning step. So in doing the planning step, you have, of course, beforehand, you have to select your respondents, and then the locale, then you have to select the sampling method, then the selection of what type of interview are you going to use, and the preparation of your instrument. Will it be an interview schedule or a interview guide? The next is the selecting of place of interview. You have to choose the place that seems to be conducive not only to you as the interviewer, but most definitely the place which is comfortable to your interviewee. If it is okay for the interviewee to be interviewed in their homes, then be it. But if they wish to be in some place such as a restaurant or any place that is most convenient to both of you, then be it. But of course, if that would be the case, then you, being the interviewer or the researcher, has to spend for the expense for that specific place. And of course, you should not forget that if it should be conducted in a restaurant, for example, make sure that you have some orders also, such as drinks or sort of food, as part of a protocol in conducting an interview. Then the third step is establishing rapport. So how do we do this? When you say you have to establish rapport, if before the conduct of the interview proper, at least you have made some conversation already, preliminary conversation with your interviewee, so that you can eliminate some awkward behavior or some unnecessary reactions, and you have to explain, of course, the purpose why you are doing this interview with them. The next, of course, is the carrying out of the interview. It is expected that in doing the interview or in carrying out your interview, you have to observe the highest degree of being respectful and asking your questions. There's no you are not allowed to interrogate your respondents, nor you are not allowed to contradict what they are saying just because you feel that they are out of line. Remember, you are the one who needs their cooperation. Then another step is, of course, recording the interview. But it is also a protocol that if you will be recording the interview, you have to ask your respondents if if it is okay with them to be recorded. If not, then you have to resort to note taking. So there's a need for you to bring someone with you who will serve as your secretary while you are doing the interview. And finally, of course, closing the interview. So as you close the interview, do not forget to extend your gratefulness to your interviewee for giving you the chance to conduct the interview and for providing you your needed data for the study. And in general, please be respectful at all times in doing your interview. And of course, there are some things we need to avoid while we are conducting the interview. So one of the don'ts is talking about irrelevant matters. Since the time of your interviewee are as precious as your time, so avoid speaking or talking about things which are irrelevant to the matters at hand, meaning irrelevant to your study. Second, it is also a don't not to exert undue pressures. No, exerting undue pressures to respondents to make him participate. So do not press your respondents, particularly in answering questions which they think they are not comfortable with in giving answers. So do not exert too much pressure as your respondents make their responses. Then another is placing the interviewee in embarrassing situations. So since it is you who needs their cooperation, please avoid placing your interviewee in situations where they will feel embarrassed. Okay? Then another is disagreeing or arguing with or contradicting your respondent. As what I am mentioning earlier, please refrain from disagreeing or from arguing or from contradicting with your respondents as regards to their answers. Okay? Then appearing too high or above the respondents in education, in knowledge, and social status. So as you do the interview, especially if they say you are interviewing vulnerable people, so please do not appear to them, before them, as if you are high and mighty, as if you are above them, such as in terms of education, of knowledge, or social status. If you feel that your respondents, or if you have identified that these respondents lacks education, so you should not appear as if you are that above them as far as education is concerned. You have to appear before them someone that they can trusted with as far as their answers are concerned. Another is avoid unduly pressing the respondents to make a reply. There might be chances where your respondents are not ready to give their answers, so just give them enough time to process your questions. Do not press them to make a reply just because you are in a hurry or it's because you have something to do after the interview. Okay? Then another is interviewing the respondents in unholy hour. What do we mean by unholy hour? This is especially time when your respondents are having their rest, such as after lunch or before bedtime. So please avoid making a schedule with your interviewee in times which are in time when they need to have rest. And last is Avoid using language well over and above the ability of your respondents to understand. That is, especially if knowing that they cannot understand English, no? You keep on pressing or asking questions in English, no? Or it's because they do not understand Tagalog, you have to keep on asking them with the use of the language. So, you are even allowed not to use the vernacular where your respondents are most common with, or they are most familiar with in doing your interview. Okay, so that ends for today's session, class. By next video, we will be discussing the rest of the modes of gathering data, such as the use of questionnaire or observation. So, please check in your work text as to the activity for this part of our lesson. Thank you for listening and see you in our next video.